Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. It's truly an honor for me to be here. I want to thank the organizers. There's too many to name individually, but thank you so much for all the hard work and for inviting me to be in conversation with all of you about how going beyond utility and focusing on relevance can help us connect basic science with different audiences. This is a locust brain. Its neurons have been fluorescently labeled so that we can see where they go and how they connect with each other. And this image makes science relevant to me for several reasons. One, I'm a neurobiologist by training, so I looked at brains for a long time as a researcher. Two, because, let's be honest, it's really pretty. And three, because I think it's a great analogy about the importance of connection. Neurons are really cool cells on their own, but their true power comes when they connect with other neurons and cells. And so I've just told you three things that make me feel connected to this image, that makes this image relevant to me. So I want to ask you, what makes you connect with science? What makes science relevant to you? And you can just shout the answers and I'll repeat them. Curiosity. Connection to nature. How things work. Things that are cool. Exactly. And so I want you to hold on to these answers as I go through my talk, because I think many of them, you've just made my point. As I mentioned, I'm a neurobiologist by training, and as a PhD student, I used this little worm on your left, C. elegans, to study a molecular switch that is involved in regulating how neurons communicate, synaptic transmission, a process that is fundamental to the way that our brains work. And what made this work interesting to me was precisely this, the opportunity to understand the underpinnings of brain function. However, I was frequently encouraged to explain how studying this really basic aspect of how our brains work in the context of how it could cure or help us understand neurological disease. I was pressured to justify the relevance of my work by connecting it to how it was useful to human health. And of course that is important, but that's not what I was interested in. Now, if you're a basic scientist or you do discovery research, this is very familiar to you, needing to explain how your work is useful. But I'd argue, and I think many have argued before me just this morning, that this relevance equals utility framework is limiting to basic science, because relevance can be about utility, but it's about so much more. Well, utility implies direct practical benefit. Relevance really transcends the application of the work. So we should really be thinking about relevance as connections to people's lives, to people's cultures, to their identities. Making basic science relevant involves more than just demonstrating its potential usefulness. It requires weaving scientific concepts within the context of people's everyday lives and their experiences. Now, going back to my previous brain analogy, a neuron's true power comes from connections, how they connect to each other. And so similarly, when we connect basic science to the lives of people, when basic science communication is centered around connection, it can be much more powerful and effective. Again, why relevance? Well, relevance as connection, it can help people make sense of science, understand the process of science, how it's valuable to them. Relevance can spark awe, it can spark curiosity, which is something that is deeply personal, it's very individual, and it's connected to people's experiences and who they are. Relevance can also foster a sense of belonging in science, and it can help people feel ownership. It can help people feel seen, represented, included in science. And so how might we make science, basic science, relevant? Well, from my own work, I'd suggest that by leveraging the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, and identities of an audience to make science more pertinent and valuable to them. And in other words, through culturally relevant science communication or culturally responsive science communication. Now, there are multiple strategies for this, and I'm going to share some examples in the next few slides. Now, I want to tell you about a few other things that make me feel connected to science or that make science relevant to me. The beach, lizards, cows, and all of these things are related to Puerto Rico, where these images were captured and where I was born and raised. On your bottom right, there's a picture of me with a cow that I grew up with. That was the last cow I had. Her name was Carla. And you know, I'm sharing these pictures because my love and my interest for science it truly began in this place. My love and my interest for science is intimately connected with my identities and my cultures as a Puerto Rican woman who grew up in a rural working class community. And so that is one of the first strategies we can use to make basic science relevant, connecting it to the identities of people. Again, I fell in love with science, exploring the nature that surrounded me, with elders who taught me how to harvest plantains or which herb could calm a stomach ache. I became interested in understanding the brain when my father was diagnosed with a mental illness when I was 11. I want to show you a clip of, and hopefully we'll be able to hear it. I want to share a clip of a short film that I released earlier this year. It's called Coming Home. And in it, I precisely explore my love for science and how it is connected to my identities, to my culture, and to who I am. So while our friend works out magic here, I'm gonna go grab my drink. All right, moment of truth. When I was growing up, there was an elder in mi barrio, Don Franco. I loved following him around. I always had a million questions. Why do chickens love earthworms? Why do plants grow at certain times of the year? Why? How? Could he predict when it was going to rain, even if there wasn't a cloud in the sky? Why? He hadn't finished elementary school, but he knew so much about nature. I didn't know it then, but Don Franco was the first scientist I ever met. Now, I've screened this film in San Francisco, California, in Puerto Rico, in Phoenix, Arizona, in New York City, online, and every single time, the thing that I hear the most is how people felt seen. They felt reflected on screen, and I think that's an example of how powerful it can be to connect science to people's identities. We can connect science with our audiences by communicating science in their first language to make it more accessible and understandable and thus more relevant to their lives. This are Corey Gray and his mother, Sharon Yellowfly. So Corey was part of the group of researchers at LIGO, which is the Large Interferometer Gravitational Observatory. I always have to write that out because I'm like, I can never remember what it is. And this is a facility, this particular one is in eastern Washington state in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And LIGO was where gravitational waves were detected for the first time about a decade ago now. And this gravitational waves were predicted by Einstein like 100 or so years ago. And so this detection was a really big deal. And when the announcement was about to come out, naturally this was going to make a big splash. Press releases were being prepared and they were being translated into dozens of languages. And Corey collaborated with his mother, Sharon, to translate the press release of this historical observation into the endangered language of the Siksika, or the Blackfoot, which is an indigenous tribe of northern North America, so northern US and Canada. And so what they did not only made science relevant to their community because it was in their language. His mom is one of perhaps a few hundred people who can still speak and write this language in the world. But I think what they did also showcased the importance of indigenous languages, and it showcased the role that indigenous people play in the practice of science. Now, I'm going to stick with Corey here to exemplify another strategy of how we can connect science with people's cultural practices. Corey, as I said, is Black for Siksika, and we recently gave a talk together at a conference, and he explained how the frequency where gravitational waves are best detected remind him of indigenous singing. Corey talks a lot about his work, and when he does so, he connects it to indigenous culture by drawing parallels between how the instruments that they use to detect gravitational waves remind him of indigenous singing. And I'm actually going to let him do the talking. This is a clip of this talk that I just recorded him because I knew that he was going to be singing. So I was like, I maybe can use this. And so here I am using it. So I'm going to let him do the talking.
The lower you are is the best place for making detection. So that's our sweet spot. And so if you look at it, it's kind of around 10 to the 2 or 100 hertz. That's the low part of this U. That's the sweet spot, or that's the bucket where we look for signals. The person who invented LIGO, Ray Weiss, he noted that a middle C on a piano at about 250 hertz is kind of right in that sweet spot. When I heard that, I thought about powwow music and our voices. And so, I'm going to take another drink.
I have more water here if you need.
Okay, thank you. So this is my second time trying this. So if at the powwow tonight, you might hear different types of singing. So I'm a northern tribe, there are tribes in the south, and we all have our different styles of singing. So southern singers sing in a lower frequency band, and then northern singers Blackfoot singers kind of sing in the middle, and then contemporary northern singers sing super high. And so I'm going to try to sing in the Blackfoot style real quick.
Warm.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to sing really quick. So it's about, I think it's around 800 to 1200 hertz. And I'm going to actually turn this away. My colleagues are actually giving a talk on the other side of this wall, so I don't know if they'll hear this. They might. So. To about 1200 hertz, that's what we are. And then, like, some of my heroes who sing contemporary style would be like, it'd be really high. And you might hear that tonight.
So he's talking about, the hertz and the singing, and what you're actually seeing on the right is that detection of like where they're doing their detection, and you can, from what he describes, you can see how that connects to those detections. The singing is connecting to the detections that they're making. We can also make basic science relevant by finding common ground and share values with our audience. And that's what climate scientist and self-described evangelical Christian Dr. Catherine Hayhoe does to discuss topics of climate change with communities in the United States who are conservative and religious, which also tend to be more skeptical about climate change. She leans on Christian values like taking care of God's creations to connect the science of climate change to these audiences that otherwise may not be as open to these conversations. And she has some really cool anecdotes of how she does this in her book, Saving Us, that I would recommend. I forgot to mention that the special issue of the Journal of Science Communication has a paper by Middleton and colleagues that talks about engaging audiences with the basic science of gravitational waves, so I encourage you to check that out. We can also make science relevant by connecting it to people's daily lives, to the things that they're curious about. So these, on the left is Loari, and on the right is Mirta. They have an arrow and a circle around them, and they are community leaders in Puerto Rico. They're individuals who step up to meet the challenges presented by decades of institutional failures, colonialism, disasters, and emergencies in Puerto Rico. And their lived experiences, the trust that they have earned from their communities, and they deeply rooted understanding of their context, it really positions them in to put science in action, to put it in practice, to address everyday challenges and local problems. And collaborating with leaders like them has reaffirmed for me that science beyond the lab or universities is practiced in communities, that connecting science to the daily lives of these people, the things that they're curious about, it can help them create community gardens like Loari has, or to educate their community members of how they can use science to be ready for emergencies. All right. So, to summarize, going beyond utility and focusing on relevance can connect basic science to people's everyday lives, to who they are, to what they care about, in other words, to their culture and their context. Connecting science to people's context and culture, it can help them make sense of science. It makes science personal for them. And because of this, relevance can make people more willing to engage with science. It can help overcome barriers to engagement. It can foster representation, belonging, and inclusion in science, especially for marginalized communities. Now, I shared several examples of how science can be made relevant, but there are many more. Relevance is very personal. And so in order to make science relevant to any given audience, we have to center that audience or those audiences. We have to get to know them, and we have to build relationships with them. So when science communication is rooted in connection, in relevance, and not just utility, it becomes a powerful tool for engagement and understanding. And so to quote myself in SciPep's report that's in your packet, you can find my essay on page 30, shameless plug. Just as a neuron's true power lies in its connections to other neurons and cells, the strength of basic science communication lies in its ability to forge connections with people's lives. So I look forward to our continued conversations about how to make basic science relevant, and thank you again, muchas gracias, for the opportunity to be here.